Hey everyone. So you're in the middle of a session, a great session. Game Master's throwing bennies, you're spending bennies. It's just a good time. And then you realize at kind of a pivotal moment, you may not have as many bennies as you'd like. So is there a way to kind of optimize your build or, optimize the way you're playing to maximize the number of bennies you have at that moment when you need a benny? So roll. It's a savage world. Strangers a weird world. It's a savage world. Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. Would really love your support. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we now have a new podcast that's a general podcast, more around just general Game Master and player advice, ideas, opinions, and that's called Mastering the RPG, and that's at masteringtherpg.com. So check it out. It's rough. We're starting. So anyway, let's talk about ways that you might be able to optimize your build or use bennies in a more efficient way. So the first thing to think about is ask yourself when you're about to use a benny, what does failing actually going to do to you? And if that fail is not that bad, you don't necessarily need to spend a benny. Game masters, myself included, are really good at finding situations where we ask the question, are you happy with that? Do you like that role? Just to kind of get the players thinking to themselves, ooh, maybe I should spend a benny because maybe it's important for this to succeed. Well, get out of that mindset. Just remember that failure is an option. Things can go wrong, and lots of times that adds to the more interesting parts of the game. So things like notice checks. Most of the time, a reroll on a notice check isn't really important because whatever it is you're trying to notice, you might find another way. Now that depends on your game master. If your game master hides important clues behind notice rolls, which really is a bad idea, because again, you might fail those notice rolls and there may be a piece of information you really need that the game master should have gave you. So game masters don't hide important things behind notice rolls. Otherwise, your players will be burning bennies for really no good reasons. There's other times too where you might want to say, hey, like if you're hacking a system and you don't succeed the first time, well, maybe it's just much more interesting that you have to encounter some of those security measures and you may have to try to hack them locally versus remotely. So it could be cool. Stuff like that. Then there's also, from a build standpoint, there's edges that give you free rerolls. So you don't have to spend a benny. So there's things like charismatic. There's things like killer instinct. There's things like humiliate. All of them give you an opportunity for certain skill checks, so for certain opposed rolls, give you a chance to automatically reroll. Things like reliable, where you get a reroll on support, humiliate again, like you get a reroll on taunt. All really cool stuff that really makes it so that you don't have to spend bennies on things that maybe your character is supposed to be good at anyway. Another one to think about is things like combat reflexes. That gives you a +2 roll from being shaken. So if you've got problems where lots of times you're rolling to get unshaken and you just miss it, so now you're spending a benny so you're not shaken so you can do something, combat reflexes might be a thing that helps make that almost never happen. First strike, same thing as the kind of that build that says, don't let them hit you, hit them first. That way you won't have to spend a benny on a soak. You won't have to spend bennies to try to do that. Now, of course, the idea is that you hit them, and if you don't, well, then maybe you want to spend a benny. So, whatever. So, another thing that people spend bennies on is the change turn order. Now, my players don't do it very often, and they only do it in critical situations. So if you find yourself just really having that thirst to go first in a round, to be on top, maybe set it aside. Maybe that's, you don't need to spend a benny to get that better card. Maybe better for you if that's the kind of way you think to get at some point level-headed and take that edge, because then you will get 2 cards automatically. Other things is if you're lower in the order and you're like, hey, next round I'm going to spend a benny to get as high as I can. Maybe put yourself on hold. And you remember, if you're on hold at the end of a turn, you roll over on hold at the top of the order in the next one. So that might be a better way of handling it if that's what you want to do and you want to put yourself in a position where other players can do things, and then you can interrupt other actions and that sort of thing. Now, getting more bennies is a good thing too, right? So now you've got luck in Great Luck, which gives you an extra Benny or extra bennies at the beginning of that session. Now, if your game master is really good at keeping the Benny economy flowing, that one extra Benny may not be that important. But there are games where it's a little more gritty, or the game master doesn't give a ton out, and I'm guilty of that. I don't just throw bennies constantly. I do in con games, I do when I'm in person, but I do a lot less when I'm online gaming because, you know, you got to click the button and you got to click another button and you got to deal a card. You can't just throw it at people. So I got to get better at that. And I actually did a video on how I'm trying to be better at it, and I don't know if I've succeeded so much. But the important part is maybe more bennies is a better thing to start with, and that way you have them when you need them. Another cool thing to think about is maybe you don't have the bennies, but someone else does. And so if they have common bond, or you have common bond, or whoever has common bond, they can give those bennies to someone else. So if you're spending it, let's say you're a frontline fighter and you're wading in and you're constantly getting hit and you're constantly having to soak, having some support personnel that might have a common bond, sort of in the leadership track, and they're directing people, suddenly they can spend their bennies, which they might not be spending all that often, they can spend them on you. And then just to kind of clean it up real quick, just to add another one, and things like hard to kill, not one I would typically take, but if you want to make sure that you're ignoring wound penalties that make it so you, again, you have less penalties, which means you have less requirement to spend your bennies, just like a shooter with rock and roll. If you have high rate of fire weapon, get rid of that -2, so you have less chance that you have to spend a bennies. So those are builds that obviously aren't directly related to bennies, but if you build out things that give you, like I said, rerolls, get rid of penalties, do things that you would normally spend a benny on, things like get a new action card, things like re-rolling trait rolls, like I just mentioned, that's something to do. So therefore, you can have more bennies, or the opportunity to get more bennies through things like common bond right at the end when it's super important, whether your game master is free-flowing the bennies, whether they're a little more stingy, there'll be something there. So just some real basic stuff on bennies, how to kind of optimize a little bit, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.